I'm Leon Todd for G66. Welcome to another Tuesday Tone Tip. I'm coming at you from Sydney in Australia, so the opposite side of the country to where I normally am at in Perth. I'm playing a show at the moment. I'll be here for the next 2 months, and I'm using my FM9 for the show, but I've got my FM3 here in my hotel room, and I've been having a whole bunch of fun playing around with it, getting to deep dive, getting to just experiment with some sounds in my downtime. So there will be plenty of Tuesday tone tips coming while I am here, primarily focusing on the FM3, but I will do a tone tour with my FM9 rig as well. What I wanted to talk about today is something I've actually been using as part of the show. I want to talk about delay and where you place your delay. I mean, 95% of the time, the default for me when I think about using delay is either as a lead delay, so just to add a lovely cushion to my single note soloing, or as a very strident rhythmic delay. And normally I would place the delay after the amp and cab over here, so kind of studio style. And let's talk about the amp and the cab really quickly. I'll give you a quick little example of what this sounds like. I'm using the Brit 800 2203 high model at the moment. You can see the settings on there, nothing too advanced happening. I am using my free LTTV Mix 7 cabinet IR, a little bit of a high and low cut on here. And then I have some stereo dual detune over here, so 9 cents either side just to add some width. Let's have a listen to what this sounds like on and off with the pitch detune. Nice and greasy right there. What I've got at the moment is a very simple mono tape delay. You can see I've got 300 milliseconds of delay. I've got the feedback at 35%, and I've got the mix at 25%. This works great for leads. If I bring the mix up, I'll have a nice quick rhythmic delay style effect on there. I haven't really touched too many advanced settings on here, but it sounds like this. Nothing really groundbreaking there. One thing with the mono tape delay, because it is modeled on a physical tape echo, which had limited bandwidth, is essentially you are taking out some high end and some low end by default on there. So the delays will blend in quite nicely with your main signal. They're not like fighting against your full bandwidth guitar signal. But with the mono tape, for the rhythmic thing, you might find this with any of the kind of bandwidth limited delays, like say the mono types or the BBD types, and of course the tape types like I've got right here, is if you want that super strident but kind of smeared out sound, running the delay after the amp and cab gives you a very different effect to if you run it before the amp, so pre-distortion. And I find this really interesting. If we set the mix, say, to 20% on here and just have a listen to the effect after the amp and cab, and then I move it in front of the amp and cab, the overall kind of vibe is very different. Because we've placed the delay before the amp, what's going to happen with the echoes is rather than be essentially the same tone at a lower volume, the output of the delay is going into a distorted amp. So the first repeat will give you a very similar amount of tone and saturation, but with each successive repeat, it's kind of like turning down the volume control on your guitar. So those echoes are going to get cleaned up. It's a slightly different effect on there. Some people might describe this as like, it sounds like it's smeared out, or it sounds like it's a little bit messier, or again, it's a little bit more strident on there. But you could hear for those rhythmic style effects on there, it worked really, really nicely because it's almost like the texture of the delay tone stayed really similar to the core tone coming out of the guitar. And, you know, this is the way so many players used to run their delays. You know, in the time before amps having effects loops, or the idea of having complicated rigs where you're loading down the signal or adding your effects in post, you would have to place your delay units in between your guitar and your amplifier like we're doing here, and you can combine it with other effects. What you find is you probably have to play really precisely as well. So it's such a simple effect on there where you don't need much mix, and you probably don't need much feedback either, because I'm using the mono tape, which is quite bandwidth limited. You can get away with a little bit more feedback, but if we go to, say, just the digital mono, which in the EQ section basically is wide open, you'll hear that this kind of sounds a little messier. And I'll go back to having the mix at 20%, so both of them are the same, and we'll just swap between the two channels on here. So check this out. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is better or worse than running your delay after the amp and cab. To me, it's just got a different vibe and a different feel to it. If you want more of that kind of old school 60s and 70s style echo effect, run your delay in front of the amp. You don't need much mix, you don't need that much feedback on there. And if you're using, say, the mono tape or one of the analog or BBD types in there, you don't have to mess around with the EQ settings on there at all. They are already bandwidth limited, just like the real physical units, whether they be pedals or actual tape echoes on there. You can, of course, play around with syncing these to the rhythm of the song. And, you know, a dotted eighth note is an absolute classic, but one that I've been playing around with a lot recently is a quarter note triplet. So syncing it to the tempo. One of my favorite players, well, actually two of my favorite players from the Pat Travis band, Pat Travis and then Pat Thrall, would use this trick a lot. And if you want to hear this in full effect, go and check out either the Pat Travis band or check out the record Pat Thrall did with Glenn Hughes called Hughes and Thrall. I've been super into this effect recently, so what I'll do is give you a very quick example of how it would work. So there's going to be a quarter note triplet synced to the tempo. And of course, on the FM3, you've got the choice of two independent delay blocks. So if you wanted to have some scenes in your preset with the delay before the amp and cab, and some scenes with the delay after the amp and cab, the advantage obviously is if it's after the amp and cab, you can have stereo types, you can have panning types and ping pong types in there. The fun thing with having the delay in front, as we've talked about, it's super vibey. It gives you that old school classic rock thing in there. And, you know, if you're not quite feeling it on a particular day, say you're recording a solo and you just want a bit of that extra grit and, I don't know, character out of there, you can try this trick where you run the delay in front of the amp and cab. That is all for today's Tuesday Tone Tip. Let me know any requests for future videos, and I hope you have a fantastic week. I'll see you all out there.